Good morning, everybody. It's the end of the week. We are celebrating today the Transfiguration of the Lord. Our text is taken from Luke chapter 9, verses 28b, but I'll take the whole of 28 up to verse 36. I'd like you to pay attention to this text because unlike Matthew and Mark, the Transfiguration, in fact, it's not even called the Transfiguration. The word is not used as the it's called as a title Transfiguration, but the word Transfiguration is not even used in this Gospel of Luke. So pay attention. It's an interesting way in which Luke looks at this event that we celebrate annually on the 6th of August. Now, about 8 days after these sayings took place, let me read that again. Now, after 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with them. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified. And as they entered the cloud, then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one of the things they had seen. The Gospel of the Lord. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, the narrative of the Transfiguration, if you look, is preceded by the confession of Peter, chapter 9, verse 18, in which Peter makes that great confession. In the Gospel of Luke, he'll say, "You are the Messiah of God." And immediately after this, in verse 21, Jesus will foretell his death and resurrection. So it's followed by what we call the Passion prediction, the death and the resurrection of Jesus. What is it? That Jesus must die. And also, immediately after that, you will notice that there are several teachings on discipleship. Now, the teachings on discipleship that are found just before the Transfiguration are important because the Transfiguration takes place in context to these teachings. I've always said this to you. In the Gospels, we are not being told the biographies of Jesus Christ. Yeah, it's not this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. But there is a theology. So we need to look at the Transfiguration in the Gospel of Luke in relation to what Jesus just said about discipleship before this. Now, straight away we are told in verse 28, 8 days have passed after the confession of Peter, and 8 days have passed after Jesus has taught them on discipleship. 8 days have passed, and Jesus now takes with him Peter, James, and John, and we are told in Luke's Gospel that they are taken up on a high mountain to pray. I'm stressing that. They are taken on the mountain to pray. Why? The Transfiguration, and I'm saying that word Transfiguration is not used in the text except in the title of Luke, but this Transfiguration takes place in the context of prayer. Now, look at Matthew, look at Mark. Neither Matthew chapter 17 verse 1 to 8 or Mark chapter 9 verse 2 to 8 mention that Jesus went up on the Mount of Transfiguration to pray. They do not mention that he went to pray, nor do they mention about the Transfiguration while he prayed. So prayer, it's not in the context of prayer. In the Gospel of Luke, the Transfiguration takes place in the context of prayer. It takes place in the context of the teaching on discipleship. Now, literally what started as a mountaintop prayer meeting between Peter, James, John and Jesus quickly changed into the shining forth of the glory of Jesus. We are told that as Jesus prayed, as he prayed, he was transformed right before the eyes of these three disciples. Notice that here his face changed and his clothes become dazzling white. Now, unlike Moses in Exodus chapter 34 verse 29 to 35, unlike that the example of Moses, Jesus is not experiencing God's glory. Moses on the mountain experienced God's glory. Jesus is not experiencing God's glory, but Jesus is the very source of glory. In fact, Luke does not even use the word, as I said, transfigured, but simply says that his face changed. Look at verse 29. His face changed. Matthew says that Jesus' face shone like the sun. You'll see this in Matthew chapter 17 verse 2. And both Matthew and Luke use the word transfigured to describe what happened to Jesus. Now, for this brief time, Jesus took on an appearance more appropriate for him as the King of Glory than this humble man that he was. The transfiguration here in the Gospel of Luke is to portray Jesus for those few moments of who he really was, the King of Glory. And it is here that Moses and Elijah appear suddenly talking to Jesus. Why Moses and Elijah? Moses represented the law. The law was given to Moses. Elijah was considered the greatest of all the prophets, so he represented the prophets. The law and the prophets. The sum of the Old Testament revelation literally came to meet Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration. Interestingly, what are they talking about? Verse 31 says, they were speaking of his departure, which he was to accomplish in Jerusalem. I mean, of all the things they might have discussed with Jesus, they chose this topic of him going to die. We can almost picture, in a way, Moses and Elijah asking Jesus, are you really going to do it? Are you really going to Jerusalem? Are you really going to die for us? I mean, for the people? So, some translations, if you look, do not use that word which we find in verse 31, departure, but they speak of his exodus. See, the old exodus that took place was from where? From Egypt to the Promised Land, or Egypt to Jerusalem. The new exodus in the Gospel of Luke will be from Jerusalem to heaven. Now, in all of this, we are told that a rather sleepy Peter, so Peter and his companions who were weighed down with sleep, a rather sleepy Peter, noticed that this little gathering was now winding down and they were about to leave. And so he suggested suddenly, oh gosh, he says, I've slept through most of this. He said, let's make 3 tents. Now, Peter must have thought, this is how it should be. 3 tents up here on the mountain, all of us comfortable. Forget this idea of, Jesus suffering, being rejected and crucified. Let's build some nice tents or tabernacles here so we can live this way with the glorified Jesus all the time, up on this mountain all by ourselves. You see, Peter's suggestion meant that not only would Jesus avoid the cross, but also Peter would avoid the cross. We also do this. Lord, keep me happy in prayer. Keep me up on that mountain top. But hey, the Lord sometimes says, please go down and please move to the cross, because that suffering is coming. Yeah, we all would love to be in a retreat where we clap and praise the Lord, don't have to cook, just pray from morning to evening, don't have to clean the house, don't have to bother about the children, don't have to bother about the parish. Retreats are so beautiful. Yeah, it's the best. For those who don't do a retreat, I feel sorry for you. The most beautiful time when you're with yourself and with your God, nothing else, you don't have to do anything else. But hey, after the retreat, reality sets in, go back to the real world, says God, and now continue to live my word among the people. So, what are we told now? We are told that a cloud overshadowed them, and as they stepped into the cloud, they are terrified. Peter may not have known what he said earlier, but he knew what he saw. The cloud of glory was real, And that's why they are terrified. He was now wide awake when he and the apostles saw this cloud of God's glory, the Shekinah as we are told in the Old Testament. We are not sure whether that voice that spoke to them in the cloud calmed them, because we are told they were terrified. But we know that the voice of God affirms what Peter had declared. Remember, I said always go into context. The voice of God affirms what Peter had declared about Jesus. Earlier, Peter had said, "You are the Messiah." But now, the voice also demands from the three apostles a listening ear. This is God's Son. Okay, that's what we hear from the cloud. This is God's Son. The chosen. This is where that famous TV serial gets its name from. So this is God's Son, the chosen. And the third thing that God tells him is, listen to him. Peter, James and John are told to listen to Jesus. The voice of God calls the disciples and calls you and me to listen. We are very often in prayer blabbering, not listening. Why are they told to listen? Why are we told to listen? Because they, Peter, James and John, were in danger of being distracted by what they had witnessed, and they might have missed the meaning that they are to listen closely for. Now, in Luke chapter 3, if you read him earlier in verse 22 at the baptism of Jesus, God at that time spoke to Jesus, his son. And what did God say? "You are my beloved. You are my beloved." Now the message of God is not directed to Jesus, it's directed to the disciples. They walk into a cloud, they are terrified, they hear the voice, and the voice is directed now not to Jesus, not "you are my beloved," but "this is my son, the chosen." The word is not beloved, he's the chosen. Listen to him. So the message of God is not meant to be an affirmation of who Jesus was. The message of God is given in the imperative tense. It is a message commanding the disciples to be obedient to Jesus. For Luke, in the Transfiguration, it's not so much about Jesus, it's for the disciples. Remember, Jesus taught his disciples about discipleship. Now the disciples are being told about discipleship by God himself, and that is an obedient discipleship. This is what discipleship at the Transfiguration in the Gospel of Luke means. This is what the Transfiguration demands. Today we are being told in the Transfiguration, the meaning of the Transfiguration in Luke's Gospel for us is that we are called to be totally obedient to Jesus. Now, in our journey, my dear friends, towards God, we experience some high moments, spots when we find ourselves on holy ground, and that's when God shows himself. That was the state of St. Peter and the two apostles as they witnessed the Transfiguration of Jesus. Peter, remember, said, "Lord, let us build here 3 dwellings for you, for Moses and for Elijah." You know, in that sense, as I said earlier, Peter wanted the party to go on forever. What does Jesus do? We want our life party to go on forever. What does Jesus tell Peter? Jesus brought Peter down to earth. He leads him down the mountain, told him to stop talking about the vision, do not discuss this with anybody, and instead God says, be ready for Calvary. And that's the same message for us. The Transfiguration, as I said in the Gospel of Luke, is to teach us obedience, that we are called to listen to the voice of God. Happy feast to all of you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. Leave your comments also, because I've given you a new insight today into the Transfiguration as seen in the Gospel of Luke. I also have on my blog pottypadre.com. Potty Padre has got nothing to do with the toilet for everybody else. It's got to do with the fact that I came from a background of pots and pans. But anyway, if you go to pottypadre.com, there are about 3, you type Transfiguration in search, you will find a teaching, I think, from Matthew, a previous teaching. But you'll also find 3 classical artworks and the explanation of the Transfiguration as seen through the world of art. So all you got to do, by the way, my blog also has a section on travel and it has a section on food, and it has some old articles, some very nice ones, opinions. There are several sections. Keep browsing and keep reading. So tomorrow, normally in the evening, on Sunday evenings, I do a 4 o'clock segment called Why Do Catholics? And I said in August I was planning to do something on the consistory. I still have to finish going through the text. So if I'm ready, I'm going to do a section tomorrow at 4 o'clock, or the following Sunday I will be on. So just check. For those of you who would like to receive the text version, just send me a WhatsApp message on 98202-42151. Those of you who would like to make a donation to the Love Joy Hope Foundation for Children, send me a WhatsApp message on 98202-42151. If you're dialing from abroad, it's +91, and then I'll give you all the details that you want. Bye everybody. One last thing before I forget. Please, I'm struggling with my eye. Please don't send me forwards, WhatsApps, thank you. It really strains my eye to read small print. So I'm asking you, please, for some of you who read my daily blogs, do not respond or send me forwards. I beg some of you not to even say thank you and good morning, but they consistently do it, and when I ask them not to, they get upset. So please don't be upset. You're just helping me to focus on my work rather than have to wade through about 450 messages a day, which takes on roughly about 1.5 hours of my day just to clear the phone. So please help me. I look forward so that I can continue to do my work. God bless you. Have a lovely day. Have a lovely Sunday tomorrow.